If you have ever felt like you cannot have the life that you desire for yourself because of your upbringing and the way that you were treated as a child, this is the podcast episode for you. We were so lucky to have Lindsay Adkinson on the podcast for this episode, and she shares her experience of her childhood growing up in an abusive household and her journey of healing her relationship with herself and healing all of these aspects of her life so that now she can live the life that she desires for herself. So Lindsay is a full-time content creator since 2015, living in New York City, teaching healing, self-growth, and manifestation. She went from an abusive household and on food stamps to winning a contest for a free apartment and $70,000 after learning about the law of attraction. Like, fucking incredible. Lindsay's story that she shares with us in this podcast episode is so real, so raw, so vulnerable, and I'm so grateful for the fact that she could be that real with us here on the No Bullshit Manifestation Show. That being said, there are lots of trigger warnings in this episode with childhood abuse, with drug use, alcohol, sexual assault, rape, self-harm, and suicidal ideations. So again, I just want to give y'all the trigger warning at the beginning of this podcast episode. If those are topics that are triggering to you and you are still working through and processing, come back to this podcast episode at some later time, or just enter into it knowing that there are going to be triggering topics that we dive into and discuss in such a super fucking powerful podcast episode with Lindsay. So without a further ado, let's get into this episode. What's up, and welcome to the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, the podcast that demystifies all of the nonsense that surrounds manifestation and gives you a realistic view of what it's like to be on a personal, professional, and spiritual growth journey. I'm your host, Kat Kozad, manifestation and money mindset expert, and I'm so happy you're here. Let's fucking do this thing. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here.
Yeah, cool. So let's kick this off with your story of like, what led you to be who you are today and where you are today doing the work that you do in the world?
Yeah, so I am a full-time content creator now, focusing a lot on self-growth and inner child healing, reparenting. And I do that because of my upbringing. I grew up in an abusive home. My mom was actually pretty good when I was younger. She was a really good mom at first, but she had me really young, had me around the age of 19. So she quickly fell into addiction. Around the time I was like 8 or 9, she started like experimenting and became, more and more addicted to like harder drugs as I got older. And drugs really do take a person and make them someone unrecognizable. Like, it's hard to explain because I'll always tell people like, there's a version of my mom that I hold on to and that I feel like is the real version of her, even though I just have to accept like people change and you can't force them to change back or to be who you want them to be. But the drugs really did turn my mom into someone I didn't know. She became very angry, very bitter, very jealous, very spiteful. And it led to a lot of abuse in my childhood, verbally, physically, neglect. She would sometimes leave me to watch my brothers for weekends or a week while she'd go off with her boyfriends, or she liked to do, I don't know what the term is called, where someone is like, at the end of a concert, the girls that like sit in the back by the tour bus. For
like groupies.
Yeah, groupies. So she was kind of in that scene, which is where it kind of like started. She was started out as more of like a partier and it just escalated. And I think the more, because I have 2 brothers, all of us have different dads as well, which I know put a lot of strain on her, being a single mom of 3 kids. I'm sure is really tough, but as she got older and we got older, I'm sure it's tough taking care of 3 kids. And I think she started to realize she couldn't live the life that she had. She couldn't do the groupie stuff. So it went from partying to more numbing with drugs, and then seeing me and my brothers as who were to blame. And so a lot of my childhood, I grew up with a mother who truly believed, I think, that I was the reason that her life was the way it was. She would tell me how much she hated me, would tell me how much she regretted having me. And then the days she was sober, she would be like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean that. You know how I am. And it was just a constant cycle. There was even a time when I was around 14 that my school counselor found out, and basically it got worse because of it. It's tough when you're a kid because you think that everyone's gonna like believe you, and that's something I'm really passionate about, is making sure we listen to kids or listen to anyone who says like I'm a victim of something, because I would rather, like, say if someone was lying, I would rather believe someone and then possibly be lying than to let someone continue to live in like a harmful situation. And I did struggle as a kid. I started getting into drugs and I would self-harm, and I was hanging out with older boys at a really young age. And that actually led to me losing my virginity to rape when I was 15. And I think because I was going through all this stuff, a lot of adults saw me as like, oh, she's just like a troubled teen. And so when I talked to my school counselor, they did get the police involved, but my mom was able to convince him that I was a liar. So because of that, like, they didn't believe me and things just got worse. I also don't have a relationship with my biological dad. I've emailed him a few times, but I feel like, I don't know, like he doesn't seem the best either. So I felt like maybe don't add anyone else to the mix. But as I got older, I really took my mom's words to heart. I started to really think that maybe it was my fault, because as I got older, I love my brothers so much, but I do feel like I started to get more of like the brunt of it. And I don't know if it's because she was jealous as I don't know, just seeing me live my life, because she felt like she wasn't able to live her life, or what caused that. But it definitely ended up being like I got the most of it. And I think that's funny that so kids can grow up in the same household and have such a different experience. Because I have two other brothers, and one of them was like a football star and he did really well in school. And so my mom loved him. And the other kid, my other brother, was very, I don't want to say like a mama's boy, but he really loved my mom. And he, even with everything she did, he would protect her. So for me, I was the kid who wanted her to go to rehab. I wanted her to get better, to get healthy, because I knew what she could be, and they hadn't seen that. So I think it turned me into, I guess, her scapegoat. I was like the black sheep of the family. So as I got older, I struggled more and more, and just continued down a really bad path, and started to think maybe it was my fault, which led me into more self-harming, more drinking. I myself got into drugs and experimenting with drugs at a young age. And then right when I was about to be 18, I dropped out of high school with one semester left to go. I did get really lucky. And this is why I always say that I feel like the universe had my back, because as I was dropping out with one semester left to go, it would have been so tough without a high school diploma. My school counselor was like, Lindsay, you actually have enough credits to there at my school. I don't know if it's different at every school, but at my high school, there's two different types of diplomas you could get. One where you could go to like a regular college, but one where you could go to like a technical school. And she was like, Lindsay, you actually have enough credits to graduate with like one of the certain types of diplomas. And I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up getting my diploma that day and leaving, which I am very grateful for, because I was going to leave no matter what. And I immediately moved into a house with my boyfriend, not taking care of myself. And before you know it, I was living I don't want to say a similar life to my mom, but I was living a similar life to my mom. And that is generational trauma. My mom grew up in an abusive household herself. My mom was in foster care, and that led, to where she was. And then all of a sudden I realized I was living with this boyfriend where he wasn't abusive, but we were toxic together. He was always drinking. I was always partying. We were always cheating on each other and fighting. And it was so unhealthy. We were 18 and just like had no idea how to do anything. And I also was struggling financially a lot. There was a time where I remember I had like $2 left in my bank, and I was constantly living paycheck to paycheck, negative in my bank. And then one day it just hit me. I think someone once had said to me, I think it might have been a family member, had said something about the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I think it kind of hit me, oh no, like I am in the same cycle of my mom. And I just decided right there, like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to live a life like that. And I wanted to make a change. Should I keep going? Am I saying too much?
No, you're doing incredible. And I just want to say thank you for sharing all of this with us, because I know that, like I said to you before we started recording, so many of my listeners are going to relate to this. I've had so many ladies reach out to me and say that they grew up in abusive households. They grew up with parents who did drugs, and to have somebody who's had that experience on the show is just so powerful. So thank you for sharing all of this. And yes, please keep going.
Okay. So I think that intention, I'm really big on intentional living, because I think having that intention of, okay, I'm going to change my life is what really set everything in motion. Is because I started learning about manifestation, law of attraction, self-growth, personal development. I went all in, because one thing I pride myself in is being resourceful. I had tried going to college at one point, but I dropped out after a semester. So I was like, I don't have a college degree. I don't have a lot of education. I didn't really pay attention in school, but I do have the internet. I can be resourceful, and I pride myself on being very resourceful. And I think that's my biggest tip to anyone who's in a bad situation is, what do you have? Like, what do you have? Even if you don't feel like you have a skill, but you can develop a skill. Anyone can learn a skill. I actually read somewhere that if you were to practice something for 18 minutes a day for 1 year, by the end of that year, you'd be better than 95% of the population. So less than 20 minutes a day for a year, and you'd be better than 95% of people. So you can develop a skill. So I decided right then, okay, I don't have a lot of skills. I want to develop one. So I started using YouTube, and I realized I did have a camera. I had been in like photography and like art classes in my high school. So I decided I'm going to learn photography. I'm going to learn Photoshop and all of that stuff. So I started my own photography business, and it actually did really well because I practiced every single day. I did so many free photo shoots at first. I remember I'd be on empty on my gas tank, and I was like, you know what? I'm trusting the process. I'm going to do whatever it takes to build a portfolio. And then I signed up and went back to school for photography. And luckily I got a full ride. I had to like submit a portfolio, and with my portfolio I got a full ride scholarship. So it seemed like, even though I hadn't gotten paid very much yet, something happened. I moved out with that from that boyfriend because that was just not a healthy situation. I think we both knew we were just staying together because we needed help paying rent. I went back to school, and when I was in school, I actually met a guy that I dated briefly, and his mom was really, really big into personal development and law of attraction and all of that. And she actually took me to a live show. I think she like kind of, they were like really well off. And I think it was the first example I'd ever seen of like a healthy family and like a healthy, just a, I don't know, really strong, confident woman who, not saying my mom wasn't strong. She was very strong, for having 3 kids. I always try to like give her, I don't want to sit here and like be mean about my mom, because I understand she struggled, but it was just seeing something so different than I had been used to seeing. And she took me to this conference with different speakers, like a public speaking thing, where they're all talking about personal development, how you could change your life. And so many of them had gone through way worse things than I had gone through. And I left feeling like, if they can do this, I can do this. And that's where things just kept going. And I know we said we don't want to do too much into this, but I'll touch briefly on it. Is that within the next year, I really developed my skill of photography. I started looking into social media. There was a contest on the radio, and I did end up winning a free apartment. I would say a contest, not a lottery. I always call it a lottery, and I realized I got to give myself more credit because you did have to work for it. So I won a contest for a free apartment and $70,000 in exchange for basically running their social media for an entire year. And that really showed me how much I could change my life, because I could have taken that opportunity and been like, this is a cool free year, but I took that opportunity and was like, okay, this is a job. They're not giving me this a free apartment just because they want to be nice. They want someone it was just like this new apartment complex that had a beautiful amenities. It was on top of an outdoor mall with like a Whole Foods, every single store you could imagine, fitness centers, and basically that $70,000. And it was also furnished, was supposed to make it where I could show on my social media or their social media for a year what life living at that apartment complex would be like, with all of those amenities and the shops and above the mall and everything. And so I realized, they're wanting me to grow them on social. So I had to become resourceful again that year. And I used my photography skills. And I also, because when I went back to school for photography, I also joined photojournalism. So I used that skill, and I started looking online and watching social media tutorials on how to do social media. And I really helped them grow their social media. The apartment's actually called Avalon. It's in Georgia, and it's a massive complex now. And I take some pride, because I was like, I was the very first person to live there, and I was the one who started their social media. And through that year, I realized, okay, I have developed a skill. So I had a goal of by the end of the year, I did not want to go back to my hometown because this was 2 hours away from my hometown in the nearest city. I was like, I want to change my life. And at the end of that year, I worked really hard and I started running my own social media at the same time, my own YouTube channel, and really hustling there. I put all my eggs in one basket and just hope for the best. And I think because I went all in on myself, the universe kind of took note. And I do feel like they say, what is it? Fortune favors the bold. I feel like because I went all in, I don't know. I think maybe because I didn't have a plan B, because I've always heard like you should have a backup plan. But I think when you have a backup plan, you kind of let yourself falter. And I was like, no, I don't have a backup plan. I don't have. And the thing is, I truthfully didn't. I didn't have at the end of that year. I didn't have any, because with the contract when I was working at this apartment complex, or like living there for free, I did have to do a lot of content for them. So I wouldn't have had time to have my own job anymore because I was still also finishing up at my photography school, which was a 2-hour drive. So I was driving 2 hours there, 2 hours back, Monday through Friday. And then I was also working for them. So I wouldn't have had time for another job besides social media or something I would do at home. And I was like, no, this is it. Like, this is my 1 year to make a change in my life. I don't have a safety net. I don't have any savings. I don't have family that's going to help me. And I think that drove me really far. I don't know if you know who Les Brown is, but he's one of my favorite motivational speakers. And he says you have to be hungry. And that if you know what it's like to be hungry, apply that to your dreams. Like, you have to eat, you have to survive. And so I applied that a lot. And by the end of the year, I did have 100,000 YouTube subscribers and I had saved up $10,000 and I moved out of the state of Georgia. I moved to Ohio where I met my husband. And that was 6 years ago now. And now we live in New York City. And now I am a full-time content creator. I have 300,000 on YouTube and I have a full-time Instagram and TikTok as well, and a podcast.
Girl, oh my goodness. What a fucking incredible story.
Thank you so much.
From where life started for you. And like you said, like the generational trauma that you inherited from all of the generations before you and your family to now be the one who's broke the cycle and created this life full of abundance for yourself based off of what you wanted. And I'm just honestly blown away by all of that. So taking it back to childhood and growing up in that abusive household, seeing the drug use, seeing all of that happening and starting to become an adult, how do you feel as though your mindset was before you got into personal development, before you got into manifestation and all of that? What was your baseline on a day-to-day?
I would say pretty depressed. I would say I was constantly in survival mode, constantly looking. I think I always have had this fear. And honestly, even as I've gotten successful, this is something I've dealt with, is always waiting for what bad's going to happen, just waiting for the next shoe to drop. Yeah. I think I had this sense of dread of, oh, well, the worst has happened for me. I would say after losing my virginity to the assault, I felt okay, well, the worst has happened. Even more is just going to happen. I think I felt like I was destined for bad stuff. And I think I almost looked for the bad because of that. I started seeking out almost, I would start to put myself, obviously I would never say I put myself in a situation to be raped, but that was obviously something I couldn't control. But after that, I felt like I started to put myself in situations where more bad things would happen. I would go and steal drugs. I was on probation at one point because I stole. I would hang out with people that I knew had, bad records and were also on probation. And I went from being a young girl who loved to read and loved art to all of a sudden hanging out with people who were 14 years old and we were drinking alcohol or stealing drugs from the grocery store. And I think my mindset was just in a place of, well, nothing good can happen for me. So why not just live in the bad? Why not just accept my fate? Which is really depressing to think about it. It's really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, I can relate so deeply with that. I was very much so in that mentality growing up as well, honestly, until I found intentional manifestation and started to implement it into my life a little under 4 years ago. And it's like, it's wild how quickly things can shift with it, but how real that experience is while you're in it. So I know you said that you still, now that you've like created this success and you've really created a lot of healing in your life, that feeling of like, uh-oh, like, is something bad going to happen still comes up. But do you feel as though for the most part, you've been able to like lift that feeling of like, oh, bad things are going to happen to me?
For the most part, it still kind of lived in my mind a little bit, and that's where my PTSD diagnosis came in. So I was diagnosed with complex PTSD last year, and that made a lot of sense because I think I started to really work on my self-growth, and I had gotten myself to a point where I would have these thoughts of like, what bad's going to happen, but I could like kind of push past them, but it still kind of lived there where even though good things would happen and I would have a full-time social media career, we literally moved to New York City with this gorgeous apartment, I would still sometimes have like literal nightmares of my husband dying on his way home from work, like consistently, or, you know, just really, really dark things because I always would just think the worst had to happen to me. But then I would wake up and I had learned a lot of tools to kind of get myself out of that pattern. And I do think for the most part, I was able to push past that mindset, but like 80%, but there was like that 20% that I realized until I had my diagnosis, I didn't know it wasn't normal. Like, I just thought I had gotten to a place of like good, but also I just thought maybe everyone lived with a little bit of when's the next bad thing going to happen? You know, I always kind of lived with on high alert.
Yeah.
Even in the best situations, even when I was with my friends, like I was still kind of waiting for the what if, the bad moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That also really resonates with me. And so for people who are listening right now, who resonate with what you're saying, like, what have you done to handle that and like live with complex PTSD?
So one, I do take medication. I'm very pro medication. I feel like it gets shamed a lot. And that's so sad because I saw this doctor once talk about this and it changed my life because I was so scared to take medication. And he was like, if someone needed glasses and they were looking at life through a blurry lens, you wouldn't say, oh, they can't have glasses. And he's like, that's what it is living with a mental illness. It's not that you're putting a mask over. It's showing them, it's not when you put glasses on, it's showing them a fake world. When you put your glasses on, it shows you how the world should be, what the world looks like to everyone else. Medication isn't a mask into life. It's not a happy pill where I just wake up feeling perfect. It's just simply putting on my prescription glasses to put me at a baseline of everyone else. So I do take medication. I think I'll be on it for, I think a lot of people also are worried about taking medication because I think it's like a lifelong thing. That's not how it is. So at least not for mine. I guess everyone could be different, but for PTSD, I'll be taking it for about 2 years because my body, just from that constant sense of dread, I had a lot of high cortisol in my body growing up. And then when I was in survival mode, so I have so much cortisol that my body wasn't able to produce enough serotonin. Because when you have enough cortisol levels, it depletes your serotonin. And then your body starts looking for serotonin and dopamine through bad ways, like drugs and stuff. And that gives you like a quick amount of serotonin and dopamine, but then you also get a cortisol spike. So it's like when you start doing bad habits to get that serotonin and dopamine, you're raising your cortisol for a little bit of dopamine that immediately goes away. So it's a bad cycle of not doing the right things. So obviously if someone doesn't need medication, the things I'm doing now are the things I'll carry on once I'm off my medication, once my body is to a baseline of normal serotonin again, if that makes sense. Meaning, now I am showing myself that even if I had those thoughts, it doesn't mean I can't do it. So I live in the mindset of, I believe your beliefs about yourself matter so much, but your thoughts aren't really that important all the time. Because I think sometimes we obsess so much over our thoughts that they stick around longer. And I learned, because I'm in trauma therapy as well, that if you just let your thoughts exist and instead focus on your actions, your thoughts will change anyways. If you focus on your beliefs, the thoughts will change anyways. The meaningless thought of like, oh, I'm not good enough does not mean you're not good enough. It does not mean that's what you're manifesting. You just simply show that thought that it's wrong. You let your thoughts be the backseat driver and you take the driver's seat. So I started realizing that my thoughts were that, something bad was always going to happen and that that people were gonna one day wake up and hate me in my job. And I don't know, it was just so weird, just like unrealistic thoughts. And so once I started taking my medication and started realizing like I would have the thoughts at first, but then it's like my mind would notice, oh, that's not normal and I don't want to feel like that. So I just make sure while I'm on the medication to create a routine and habits that once I'm off the medication, I continue. So I meditate almost every single day. I love to visualize. I think our minds are so powerful. I really work on my mindset. I do EFT. I listen to a lot of uplifting podcasts. I have worked on the people I hang out around. If I hang out with someone that makes me feel bad about myself, I know for myself that that's just not how I can be. And I go to the gym as much as I can. I'm not someone who can go every single day. I go like 2 or 3 times a week, but it's better than nothing. Just because I know that increases, my serotonin, dopamine levels. And I make sure to get in steps. I make sure to get enough sleep. Really, when you have PTSD, it's really about reparenting yourself and doing the things that you probably should have learned as a child, but maybe didn't and weren't able to learn because you were in survival mode. So basically, while I'm on my medication, I'm teaching myself how to take care of myself, how to self-soothe in a positive way, so that I can continue to have those habits moving on. So if you're someone who doesn't need medication, I would say that's a great place to start, because I didn't start with medication. I started with these other things first. And some people don't need medication. Some people, they can say, okay, I'm going to get like 5% better every day. First, I'm going to make a habit of, you got to think of the habits that are going to work for you, because everyone's different. Like, you don't want to watch someone on Instagram wake up at 5 a.m. and think that's what you need, because I don't need to wake up at 5 a.m. My body is tired. My body needs rest. So maybe it's figuring out, okay, I need more sleep. Actually, maybe I need more physical activity. Or maybe if you're not tired at night to get enough sleep, it's like, okay, am I moving enough during the day? Am I treating myself kindly enough? Am I treating other people kindly? Am I treating people poorly and then wondering why I don't have a lot of opportunities in my life? Am I wanting 100% of something, but I'm only giving 50% effort? So it is really about reparenting yourself and giving a little bit of discipline, because you're gonna have that inner child, that inner teenager energy come out that really wants to fight back and say, no, I want to rebel. I want to stay how I am. But you have to fight back. It's really tough, and be like, no, do you want to grow up or not? Because my therapist actually once said that when you have PTSD, your brain stops developing at the age that you experience trauma. Yeah. So my emotional maturity level was very young. It was of a teenager. And the only way to grow your emotional maturity is by forcing, like a parent would have had to, with discipline, not like hurting yourself, just like, by forcing yourself to do the things you may not want to do. Like a parent in the summer who might make you get up and go mow the grass or something. You've got to know that even if you don't want to, you've got to get up and do the thing anyways, because your future self will thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So much power in all of that. And thank you again, just for sharing your experience with the medication and all of that, because it gets like such a bad rap. And I think it is because so many people think as though they're going to have to be on it for a lifetime, or that like, it's this quick fix and it's not actually helping you get to the root. And it's like everything that you just said demystifies that so much. And one of the things that really stood out to me in what you said that I want to hammer on, because the world of manifestation teaches us, and it drives me insane, is what you said about thoughts. It's like, your thoughts don't fucking matter. Like you hit it so well with the fact that like your beliefs matter, what you think about yourself day in and day out, like the core beliefs of what you base your life on. Absolutely. Those matter. But it's like, if you have those thoughts of like, whatever, those thoughts don't impact every single day what you're going to attract and manifest into your life. And there's so much power in what you said for everybody who's listening, who maybe feels as though like, oh, I can't get my thoughts straight. I can't get my habits straight. I can't get all of this straight. There's so many little daily things that you can do. And with the little daily actions, you create this compound interest and like positive effect of everything that you've done to create this big, beautiful shift in your life.
Absolutely. I love that. And really, if you focus more on the actions in your life versus the thoughts are they're gonna come and go, and they're gonna get better over time anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking it back again, to when things started to like initially shift for you from like childhood, teenage years into like becoming a young adult and now an adult, was there any like pivotal point that was like, okay, like I need to like change, or what was the shift that allowed you to really get into the mindset of like, okay, I want to become resourceful. Like, I don't want to have to live with this like generational trauma anymore.
I think for me, I had to hit rock bottom, which sucks, but I think I did, because there was a day when I had no money and I was negative in my bank account, and I was looking through my fridge and all I had was oatmeal. And I was like, I don't want to eat oatmeal. I just had it for breakfast, but I was like, that's all I have. So I had oatmeal for lunch. And then that night I had oatmeal for dinner. And the next morning I woke up and I'm like, I know this sounds so silly. I've talked about this on my YouTube channel a few times, but that's the word oatmeal kind of changed my life, because I was like, I am sick of oatmeal for every single day. Like, I don't want to live a life of only eating oatmeal. And I still eat oatmeal for breakfast sometimes. That's not what I'm saying. But it was just that symbolism of, is this it? Like, is this, like, I want to experience other things. And so I remember I was like, I scrounged all through my apartment and I found enough money, like laying around, like quarters and nickels and dimes and dollars that I found, that I had enough to go take myself to McDonald's, and I got myself some food. And I was like, I just had to look for it a little bit. I had to look for the cash somewhere. And I remember I ended up finding like $30, and I was like, that was enough to put in my gas tank and get food. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that was there. And so I think that showed me, that sounds so silly, but it showed me I had already hit rock bottom. And if I just tried a little harder, I could make something else happen. Maybe I couldn't go from eating oatmeal and being broke to being a full-time YouTuber, but I could go from being broke to finding enough cash to taking myself to McDonald's and putting gas in my tank. And then went from that to being able to look online to think of what's a job that I can create. And then I could be like, okay, so how can I start that job? So I think it was by taking incremental steps. And I'm really big on dreaming big, but sometimes that's really overwhelming, especially if you don't come from a place where you've been able to dream very big. So it's like, you want to have these big goals and big aspirations, but you want to break them down into bite-sized pieces. You want to break it down into 1% a day and start really small, because if you're overwhelmed by your goal, then you're just going to sit on the couch and say, I'll do it again tomorrow. I'll wait for the new year. I'll wait for Monday. You want to think, what is something that is in my control that I can do now? And so I think that was my mindset shift, is like, I don't have to do it all today. I just knew I didn't want to be where I was at on rock bottom anymore. So I just wanted to crawl up a little bit more. And then every single day I took baby steps. And then it's like, you go from crawling to walking to running, and it starts to build momentum. And I think we think those little tiny habits aren't going to add up, but usually your life, something big usually happens when your life changes. There'll be like something happens almost always. And it's not that one event. Actually, it was from all of the compounding work you put in. And then it seems like when you look at someone that's an overnight success, that's how people thought of me when I won Avalon. They're like, oh, she's an overnight success. But I actually had spent the last year of my life going to photography school, scrounging by. I was working 2 jobs along with going to college, going back to school, because I was the only way I could afford to pay my bills and go to school and have gas go back and forth. So I was always working and going to school, and any free time I had, I was doing free photo shoots to build a portfolio. So people might have seen it as an overnight success, but if I didn't have all of the stuff I'd been doing for the past year, I wouldn't have won Avalon. I wouldn't have had the proof. So when you see someone that has overnight success, you have to know, like, it's the little tiny steps. Will Smith once said that if you want to change your life and you're at rock bottom, you don't look at a brick house and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to build a brick house tomorrow. You think, okay, I have a goal of owning a brick house, but what I'm going to do is every single day, I'm going to lay down 1 brick. And I'm going to lay down that brick as best as possible, because I don't want to just slap the bricks together. I want this to last. I want it to be a foundation for the rest of my life. And you're going to lay 1 brick so perfectly and do that every single day. And before you know it, you will have a brick house that lasts forever. Because so many people want to manifest some big overnight thing, but what you really want is consistency. Yeah. I don't want to manifest when people say like a random check in the mail. I don't want that. I don't want 1 random check. I want control over my life. I want to know that I am going to forever be financially stable for the rest of my life and happy. So yeah.
So fucking powerful. It is. It's so true. It's like the number one thing that I see with the women that I work with is like, the frustration that comes up when they don't manifest $1 million overnight, or they don't manifest the house or whatever it is. But it's like, even if we were to get that thing overnight, if we don't have the habits, if we don't have the belief systems, the behaviors, whatnot, to be able to sustain that, then that's actually like one of the most harmful things that we could do for ourselves, is like manifest that into our lives, as opposed to what you're saying of like creating these daily habits, 1% every single day, to help create that consistency, create that momentum. That's what's actually going to lead you closer and closer to manifesting the life that you want for yourself.
Yes.
And just like you have with like your content creation and YouTube and Instagram. So I know that people will be super curious about that as well. What is it like to be a full-time content creator, especially here in New York City? Like, I know that a lot of the women that I work with, that's like the dream for them. So from somebody who does it, share your experience of what it's like actually like to be a content creator.
Honestly, it's really rewarding. When I first started out, I was doing more like lifestyle content, like hauls and things like that. It took me a while to really post on the internet about where I came from. For a while, I kind of had like a persona of just like, this girl that had just moved to Ohio because it was before New York, and who had this like really cute boyfriend, and just hauls and cleaning videos. And then I think once I transitioned more into the content that I loved, it felt really fulfilling. It's honestly life-changing for me. I think I love being able to have control over my job. I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to be an influencer, though, is to not just see yourself as an influencer or a content creator, but as a business. I think for the first few years, I just saw myself as an influencer, and that's fine. Like, I just did brand deals, but the past year, I'm like, okay, wait, I don't want to just rely on brand deals for my whole life. I don't want to build someone else's business. I want to build my own. So I think it's really important, if you want to be a content creator, to make sure you have your own things, like a podcast or, a YouTube channel, an email list, products, courses, whatever that is. That way you can rely on yourself, because it is really tough to rely on brand deals because it can come and go. So I think make sure that you have your own stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And I'm so glad that it's so fulfilling. So like thinking back to little Lindsay, who was in like the thick of her shit, and like maybe thought that life could never be better than what it was at that time. What do you think she would say about like life today for you?
Oh my gosh, she would shit her pants. She would literally flip out, because when I was young, I was a wild child. I was a kid that would get in trouble for talking too much in class and talking too fast. I remember my teachers would write home in my agenda, because when I was really, really young, I lived with my grandma. That was like my happiest moments. And like when I saw my mom, it'd be great. So during those times, I was like a happy kid with big dreams, who thought I was going to like change the world. And they'd write home in my agenda, like, Lindsay loves to stick up for everyone, but she has to learn that sometimes she has to sit down and do her work. And as I got older, that part of myself kind of went away. I kind of put myself in a box because of all my trauma and everything. And I became kind of shy and quiet. But my biggest goal for the past few years is to get back to younger me. Because obviously, like in school, I had to do my work and stuff. But now I'm like, I like that version of me that is loud and takes up space and isn't afraid to say how I feel, and isn't, because with PTSD, one thing is you're always afraid of people hurting you. And I was so constantly afraid of everyone being mad at me that I never really was my full self for a while, that I'm like, no, in 2022 and now 2023, younger me just wants me to be like my boldest, brightest self again. Like, I want to get back to that version of me that was sunny and bright and fun and talk too loud. And my grandparents always be like, Lindsay, slow down, no one could understand you, because I was so excited to get out what I had to say. And then it's like, for a while, I just became a version of me that was quiet and in a box. And I think younger me would just be happy that I'm breaking down those walls, I think.
Oh, so beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
It is. It's like the goal is to get back to like that like almost innocence and like excitement inside of yourself that we did experience as kids. And last question I have for you is, what is one piece of no bullshit advice that you can give to everybody who's listening, who's resonated with your message?
Okay, it's two parts. Well, it's actually kind of one, but consistency is what matters the most. And with anything you do, it's about consistency. It's not the person who gives all of their effort one day, it's consistency. However, something that I learned that really changed my life is stop seeing every time you take a break as starting over. If you want to change your life, say, I'm just using a random example of going to the gym. Every time you go to the gym and then you take a week off, stop looking at it as like, oh my gosh, I messed up again, I have to start over. No, you are human and you took a break. You're going to continue, because every single time that we tell ourselves that we have to start over, it tells ourselves to be overwhelmed, that we're starting from zero. You're not. You're continuing. And if you continue, and as much as possible, even if there's 5 days in between, that's still better than constantly thinking every single time you go to the gym that you're starting from zero. No, if you only go once a week, but you learn something new each time, before you know it, you'll have the confidence to go to the gym and do whatever you want, use any machine. If every single time you think you want to start being a content creator, you post an introductory post and you're like, oh man, I got nervous, I didn't love that, I'm not going to post again for 2 weeks. If every single time you post, you're starting like you're from zero, that's where you're going to be. Every single time you post, you want to post as if you already have 1 million subscribers. And if you take a week off, use the mindset of, I'm not starting over, I'm continuing. That way you continue that consistency, you don't overwhelm yourself, and you'll notice it's easier to keep going longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And especially with us being so fresh into 2023, this is so huge for anybody who's listening. Like, do not see yourself as a beginner with every single thing that you're doing. The consistency that you have in what you're choosing to pursue this year is what is going to actually make those things manifest.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Lindsay, thank you so much for such a powerful conversation. Thank you so much for like your honesty, your transparency, for like being this vulnerable with all of us. I know that so many of the listeners are going to benefit from this. So where can they find you, and what do you have going on right now that they can be a part of?
So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at Lindsay with an A, Lindsay.Adkinson. I post all the time. I have a podcast called It Gets Better, and I upload it on YouTube as well as like Apple and Spotify and everything. But besides that, I do also have a group coaching membership. It's only $22 a month, where we get together a couple times a month and we hold each other accountable. We do intention setting, we meditate, we talk, we vent. And it's actually just starting. Probably when you're listening to this, whenever this goes live, it'll have already started. But the first call is tonight, which has been my biggest dream, is to have like an affordable group coaching membership. So I felt like now is the time.
Amazing. Yay. Cool. All of Lindsay's links are going to be down below in the show notes. So make sure to go find her and check her out. But again, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.